So as someone born and raised in Hawaii, I want to share my reaction to John Oliver's last weeknight piece about Hawaii. Because at first I was like, hey, this is talking about Hawaii. All right. But then you realize that it's not necessarily in the best of light. I mean, it was nice to see Hawaii in the national spotlight, absent of a volcanic eruption, catastrophic wildfire, or the live action remake of Lilo and Stitch. And whew, brother, that's gonna be one tough one for watch. If you haven't seen the last week tonight episode about Hawaii, you should if you have any interest in the state. He summed up some Hawaii history and the impacts of the military, tourism industry, and outside wealth. Stuff that many of us locals kind of already know. Seeing as I have a YouTube channel about life in Hawaii, I felt it would be remiss of me to not add something to this conversation, particularly from a local's perspective, which, by the way, is different from a native Hawaiian perspective. And sure, I may not be as funny as John Oliver and his team of writers, but I think a local's perspective is still an important element to this conversation about Hawaii, as he himself acknowledged that you should probably be listening less to outsiders like him and more to people closer to these issues. And as someone who was born and raised here and is currently raising my family here, I think I'm pretty close to these issues. First of all, it kind of feels strange to be talked about like that. I mean, do you laugh at yourself and the state that you live in? And if you do laugh, how hard do you laugh? Because in a lot of ways, it's kind of sad what's being said, knowing that it's true and that you as a local resident know that and have to deal with it every single day. I mean, it reminds me of when I was in elementary school and there was this kid in the class named Sean, and he was a little strange, you know, the kind of kid that would eat weird things and act out just to get attention. And because of that, we collectively, as a class of kids, would often laugh at him and tease him. And looking back, it's not something that I'm proud of, even if he did some pretty weird things in school. But I remember there were times when we would start laughing at Sean and he'd join in the laughter, laughing at himself. And I'm sure in those moments when he was laughing at himself, he felt very sad. So as Hawaii is being talked about, as jokes are being thrown around and humor is being interwoven within a narrative of its history and the hardship, I sort of feel a tragic laughter on the inside. I mean, the episode is absolutely funny and the jokes are really good, and no offense taken, especially being from Hawaii, where we often learn we gotta laugh at ourselves. However, there's this sense that the joke is ultimately on us. And it's not taken in a mean-spirited way, but that is the reality of life in Hawaii for many people, and it's hard, and sometimes all we can do is laugh, like my classmate Sean. And so while everyone else is learning some very interesting things about Hawaii and has a good laugh when watching the Hawaii segment, including us, they get to walk away from the problems and the reality of life here, moving on to the next topic, you know, the next viral video or the next distraction in their feed. But the thing is, for us here in Hawaii, we turn around and we're still in it. For a week or even less than a week, Hawaii will be trending as a topic. But just as fast as it rises, it will eventually drop. And everyone else will move on to the next funny thing. And this is absolutely natural. We tend to do this as humans. We tend to move on to the next shiny thing, the next interesting thing, whatever is trending on social media. Just like most of us have at this point moved on from some of the more popular Olympic sports like gymnastics and track and field and swimming. And so how do I think local people will feel about this segment? I mean, I have a feeling that many locals, and also non-local people for that matter, may get invigorated after watching this by seeing the injustices of what's happened in the past, what's currently happening, and they're going to share their opinions loudly and in probably all caps in the YouTube comments. But I also think that a lot of locals will watch this and think to themselves, well, I already knew most of this stuff. There's nothing new here. And at the same time, I don't feel like I can do anything about it. And as for me, as I mentioned, I'm glad that Hawaii was talked about at all. Anytime Hawaii is mentioned, I'm happy about it because it brings more exposure to the state. And when I was on the mainland, I loved hearing references to Hawaii. But I also recognize that we're hardly ever mentioned in the national and global sphere, except maybe when people talk about a place to go on vacation. And so despite life being so challenging in Hawaii, where does that leave us now? And I'm sure some of the comments are going to suggest maybe restricting home ownership to locals only. And other people might mention the Jones Act, and others might even suggest Native Hawaiians should be allowed to establish a sovereign nation. But when you watch the video, it doesn't really present any of those solutions, and understandably so. But I do want to highlight what John Oliver said towards the end, that the solution's not going to come down to any single trip you might take. It's going to require much bigger systemic choices. That's an oddly broad solution, but one that I can sort of understand. And I do think that it will take bigger systemic choices to change things, but that those systemic choices will be on us. Not the people who come here and attend the luau's or stand in line at Cheesecake Factory in Waikiki and refer to slippers as flip-flops. No. It's going to come down to us locals, the ones who live here, the ones who work here, and the ones who pay the taxes. And the way I see it, one of the best ways to initiate change is through civic engagement, which, to be frank, is pretty bad in Hawaii. Because yes, we can talk all about what happened in the past historically and how it's contributed to how hard and challenging life is today for many people. But if we're going to start untangling all that mess, it's going to be a slow process that's going to take local residents getting involved, becoming informed, and figuring out and learning how things are being run here. And how do you expect that change to happen when voter apathy in Hawaii is at an all-time high? In the recent 2024 primary election this past week, just 32% of registered voters in Hawaii voted. That means nearly 2/3 of locals didn't vote. Now, just let that sink in. I mean, there you are, you're shopping at Costco Evile, the parking lot is horrible, the aisles are packed, the lines are long, and you look to the person on your right and the person on your left, and chances are, between the three of you, two of you guys never vote. And the thing is, Hawaii is a primarily mail-in vote state. They mail you the ballot, like it comes to your house. And since 2020, we've gone from 51% voter turnout to 39% in 2022 to now just 32% in 2024. So I gotta ask myself, what exactly is happening? Are local elections just not that interesting or important to local people these days? You know, do they have to make it even easier for us to vote? Like maybe they gotta start sending it through our phones. I mean, I just don't get it. Was there some kind of sale at Ross or something? And I find it very interesting that when stories like the one that John Oliver put out on social media, there are a lot of comments of complaining, people complaining how things are. Lots of criticizing and pointing fingers. And the thing is, that's their right to do so. I may not agree with the logic or the reasoning behind their argument sometimes, but it's their right to complain, and I wouldn't want to take that away from them. But I gotta ask, how many of those people who complain can vote in Hawaii, and do they exercise their right to vote? Do they choose to vote? Because it's a choice, right? You could choose not to vote. And if you choose not to vote, I'm thinking in some ways, in many ways, maybe in all ways, doesn't that mean that you give up any validity, substantiality, power your opinion may hold? In other words, if you never vote, don't complain. And again, we all have the right to complain, and I'm not saying that they can't feel certain things. But if you're not going to vote when the ballot is mailed to your house and we're all automatically registered to vote when we get our driver's license, then why complain about how things are done in Hawaii? So yes, there's this personal responsibility aspect to this. And I know, no one wants to hear that. I know we rather focus on fantasy football stats and knowing where the ono food is and the best places to eat in Hawaii are. I get that's important to local people. But what about basic civics and local government? And it's not like you gotta follow local politics all the time, although that honestly probably wouldn't hurt the general public knowing what's actually going on. But to at least know what's going on during election time. I mean, maybe we gotta pay a little bit more attention. so that when we do see articles and stories and videos about Hawaii, about ourselves and how challenging it is, we don't get just so worked up and that's it. That we actually already know this stuff is happening and we're prepared to do something about it. And so while John Oliver and the team maybe felt a little outside of their element in offering solutions, I like to offer, 3 things that I think we can do better to increase this engagement in the public, to help us start untangling some of these problems that we have, because it's not just going to go away on its own. And let me just add to that, throwing money at the problem is not necessarily going to solve it. Sometimes you got to bring the big bucks. Sometimes you need money to do it. But most of the time, it's just small changes over a long enough period of time. So first, the state elections office has got to do a better job to get the word out. I mean, yes, I know their job is to count all the ballots and do all the official stuff. I got it. But I think part of the job now should also be to get the word out about the election, about the candidates, about what's going on. I mean, you look at where we're trending, voter turnout is going down. And they gotta work on that. It cannot just be TV and social media and mailers and people waving signs here in Hawaii. I think they really gotta take a step to not promote any particular candidate, but at least let people know, like, hey, election is coming, check the mail. And sure, maybe they put stuff on TV, but there's gotta be other ways to get people interested and excited about what's going on. Okay, second thing, I think we gotta start teaching the importance of voting in public schools. Now, yeah, for the private school kids here, I'm sure they got classes, but speaking as a public school graduate over here, I'm just saying, in high school, I knew nothing about local politics, about voting, about I didn't know anything about that kind of stuff. And just like I think we should start teaching our local kids about financial literacy, because we're actually ranked quite low in that, I think we should also include like civic lessons and just about the importance of voting. Because if they don't understand why something is important and how it affects them, they're not going to do it, right? As kids and even as adults, right? It's kind of like flossing, right? It's like if you don't understand why you got to floss, you're not going to do it. And in the same way, if you don't start flossing when you're young, brother, it's kind of hard to start when you're an adult. And third, local people, we got to do a little bit better. I know how we can be sometimes. I know we super laid back and sometimes we get the I don't care attitude, but I think sometimes that attitude goes a little bit small time too far. I mean, maybe spend less time, scrolling the phone, maybe less time in Ross, maybe take some time, take some initiative to, learn about the local races, learn who your rep is, learn who your senator is, maybe some of the issues going on. And I know it's hard. We got so many other things that we want to do. We're all busy, right? And we're driving through traffic. We got to go work. We got to deal with the kids. The last thing I want to do is think, right? So I get it. But if we really want to see changes in Hawaii, unless we want other people making those decisions for us, which seems like that's sort of what's happening, we have to show that we care, that regular people care, and that we're participating in a democratic process. So returning back to the John Oliver piece, yes, it's all funny and we can all laugh, or some might feel outraged about what's happening here. But if people are going to continue to not vote, well, then that's on us locals. Collectively, that's on us. And frankly, 32% voter turnout is not funny at all. Thanks for watching, and aloha.